It's very important stuff, as Steffi says, but how about this? How about a 4.5-year-old startup with revenues of roughly 2 billion pounds, 4.5 years into its existence? That's not something you encounter very often. It is something a consequence of the flukes of the energy industry, and their margins might not be the same as Google and Facebook. But this company is an extraordinarily well-positioned company. And Hayden, who used to be a consultant at Bain & Company, basically started it, or helped start it, co-founded it, because he was so frustrated with his own experience as an energy consumer to start out. But tell us what Bulb is.
We are, well, thank you very much for having me. We are an energy supplier. So the company that you pay your monthly bills for electricity and gas into your home, that's the business that we do. We operate that business. We're not vertically integrated, so we don't own wind turbines and solar panels and hydroelectric plants, but we purchase the power from those companies and then we sell it to consumers.
Okay, well, I will explain. There's sort of a two-part equation here. They're bringing modern methods of management and efficiency, digital business design, to the utility industry, which is just a dinosaur-like antiquated industry. And they're also committing to alternative energy supply. So they're offering customers not only green energy, but at what is the rough savings that your British customers, which is where you're predominantly based, are able to get?
So the way we deliver that energy to people's homes, we do it in a much more digital way. So today, Bulb has 1.6 million customers in the UK. In order to serve those customers, we employ around 550 people. If we hadn't developed our own software, our own technology to manage our customers' accounts and to serve them, and operating in the way our competitors do, we would need to employ between 5,000 and 6,000 people to operate our business. So we're around 10 times more efficient. That efficiency means that we can have a much lower cost base than our competitors. And it means that when consumers switch to us, this is the answer to the question you just asked. So in the UK, the average bill is around £1,000 a year, and people would save around £200 to £250 when they switch to us.
Wow, and when you multiply that times 1.6 million customers and growing, it adds up. So you're in the UK predominantly where you've got a good market already established, growing rapidly, and you're expanding. Talk about that.
Yeah, so we realized last year that there are lots of similar energy markets to the UK around the world. We realized that the software that we had built for the UK could be made of use in other countries. So we have a list of 15, 20 countries that we're planning to expand into. The first three that we've launched in already is France, Spain, and Texas.
Texas is a country in some people's opinion, but we call it the United States. But anyway, that's a pretty impressive. The thing that's really amazing is you are providing almost entirely or entirely sustainable energy, sustainably produced energy.
So 100% of the electricity is renewable.
Yeah.
It comes from wind, solar, and hydro. A lot of people's heating in their homes uses gas in the UK, so we supply gas to people's homes. Of the gas that we supply into people's homes, 10% is green gas, so it comes from renewable sources. We take methane and feed that into the gas grid. And then for the 90% of gas that is natural gas, which isn't renewable, we purchase offsets to offset the carbon emissions.
So the customer who's saving money can also count on the fact that their energy is coming to them from renewable sources. That's a pretty great equation.
Yeah.
So you're dovetailing with a sensibility shift that's happening for reasons that we've heard repeatedly at this conference as urgent. But that's really pretty great combination, saving money and going green.
Well, when we went to rolling the clock back, when we first looked at this, there were some renewable suppliers in the UK, and I have so much admiration for what they started doing 10 years ago, but they were very niche. So there were maybe 100,000 homes that were purchasing energy from these companies. and consumers were being asked to pay more to get renewable energy. The thing that shocked me when I first found out was that in the wholesale markets, renewable energy wasn't costing substantially more. It was marginally more, but not much more. So really there was a premium being charged by these retailers to consumers to purchase renewables. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to make renewable energy something everyone could afford, which is why we decided to make it cheap and green. And we were able to do that with our cost savings. What that's meant is that now around 15% of homes in the UK are purchasing energy from a renewable supplier now.
You not being the only one.
No, we're not the only one.
You're the biggest though, right? Yeah.
We are, yeah. And there's been a huge growth in that. And yeah, we are a kind of, how can I say this, an unashamedly mainstream product. We don't want to just be selected by people who are purely passionate about the environment. It's very important to me, but it might not be to everyone. My favorite sign-ups of members joining us are ones where they find out that we are renewable after they've switched.
So you're marketing primarily based on price. Yeah.
That's the most important criterion.
Which is a great thing to be able to do with renewable energy. But at the same time, the cost of renewables has continued to come down even since the time you mentioned, and it's actually cheaper to produce most wind and solar today from the infrastructure creation and distribution side, right?
If you want to build a power station today and you're choosing which technology is going to be you're going to get the most electricity from for the investment, then yes, the cheapest form of electricity generation is onshore wind. That's substantially cheaper than nuclear and fossil fuels. I think the other reason why we started the company was because we saw so much potential in these more distributed, smaller scale forms of generation. We think that's really going to change people's relationship with energy. If you imagine that 50 years ago you had these huge power stations that would then generate electricity and distribute it to the area around them. In the next 20 years, we're going to have wind turbines and solar panels in people's homes, on people's homes, I should say. And that power is going to be embedded within the grid. So homes are not just going to be drawing power from a large power station. There'll be times when a home is feeding electricity onto the grid and homes when it's taking it off the grid. And we weren't seeing traditional utilities making that transition easy. So that's why we wanted to start a digital energy company that was going to make it easy for people to manage their energy in their homes rather than just take it from a large power station.
So do you install meters in the homes yourself, or do you own them? Do you control the meters?
We control the meters.
And do you have to replace them if somebody's doing their own, if somebody has solar and they're capable of generating energy back into the grid? That's not a routine functionality of a typical British utility meter, is it?
No. So you'll check the meter has to change so it can measure both import and export, and then we will enter into an agreement with the consumer to purchase the excess surplus power.
So you help them get the new kind of meter they need, right? Yeah. So is that a rapidly shifting? I mean, how many people in the UK are actually capable of selling energy back in the grid? It can't be a huge number at this point.
No, it's still relatively nascent, so we have around 1% of homes.
Right.
Sorry, 3% of homes.
Is it higher in Texas, by the way, where there's a little more sunlight typically?
The economics are better in Texas, but the penetration is the same.
Interesting. Well, one of the things you said at the beginning was you aren't vertically integrated. You don't actually produce the power, but you do store the power from renewable energy, because one of the real vexing problems with wind and solar is it is not necessarily produced at the same time that it is used. So transferring that is a big challenge. And anybody who heard Bill Gross here in this, how many people here heard Bill Gross yesterday in here? I hope you were as impressed as I was. That was quite an amazing presentation. And he's got these crazily ambitious, really creative ways of storing energy using cranes and weights, and may very well work. In fact, I described it to you and you found it interesting. And I'm hoping you can meet him. But what do you think? I mean, so you are, just talk about the battery part of it and how challenging that is and the cost of it.
Yeah, so in the UK, we have around 35% of our electricity generated by renewables. In Germany, it's a little higher than that. And we're reaching the stage in both markets now where the price of electricity over the day will fluctuate quite substantially because demand does not meet supply.
The price you're paying as the provider.
In the wholesale energy markets, yeah. So if we want to take the share of renewables up to, say, 80, 90%, it's assuming that we have the remainder provided by existing nuclear power stations, we are going to have to solve the flexibility problem. The fact that, you mentioned, Bill was talking about this yesterday, renewables are the cheapest way of generating power, but not necessarily at the time that we need it. We think that the solution to that problem is batteries. They might be lithium-ion, there might be other forms of electrolyte. And so what those batteries allow you to do is shift power from, say, the middle of the day, when solar panels are generating a lot, but it may not be used, into the peak periods between 5 and 7 p.m. in the day. There's a second, more complicated storage problem that we haven't come up with a solution on yet, which is seasonal storage. So in the Northern Hemisphere, we use way more energy in the winter than we do in the summer because people are using heat. That storage is not really appropriate for batteries to do because they don't maintain charge for as long. So we are looking at ways in which we can do that. It looks like the most cost-effective way of doing that is to use excess electricity in the summer through electrolysis to generate methane, and then store that methane in the existing gas networks.
Methane, we call it in the U.S. But
yeah, you say tomato.
Yeah, right, exactly. So one of the things that's a little different in the UK market compared to the American one is that you are able to actually be the utility, right, under the British law. Whereas in the U.S., that's sort of a geographic franchise, typically, right, where the utility provider is the utility provider. You can opt as a consumer to have somebody else essentially at the back end, which I assume is the role you play in Texas, right?
No, we have in Texas.
In Texas, you're able to be the utility.
Is one of a handful of states in the U.S. where we can be a utility. But you're absolutely right.
Not in New York State. Yeah.
In New York, you have Con Ed. I think.
Well, I have a different one. But
yeah. And then PG&E, obviously very large in California. So there are those states where consumers don't have the power to choose. But in Texas, you do, which is why we chose to launch there. One of the things that surprised me when I found it out for the first time is that of your total utility bill, only about 70% of the charge comes from the cost of generating the power and the network. Around 30% of the bill is made up of operating cost for the utility.
Well, this is where your business opportunity lies. Right?
Exactly, and that's where we deployed our technology.
Let's talk about Germany, since there are a lot of Germans here. You're not in Germany. Why not?
We're not in Germany today. Bulb has there's a simple reason, which is that the way pricing works in Germany is less transparent than it is in other markets. And Bulb has a slightly different, has a very different pricing model to other energy suppliers, whereas other energy suppliers have multiple tariffs, and as a consumer, you'll sign up to one deal, and then maybe 12 months later, that supplier will move you automatically onto another deal, often more expensive. That's one of the things that we just didn't think was fair. So Bulb just has one deal, and in the UK, we're able to communicate that clearly, and people understand the economic savings they make from not being put onto the really high rate. In Germany, it's a little less transparent. So it wasn't one of the first markets that we chose to operate.
Okay, so one of the things I really want to talk about with you is the sort of shift in consumer psychology and citizen psychology around climate that's happening globally. There's clearly something major going on really this year, and the extraordinary, just last week, there were three, in my opinion, extraordinary things that happened. Two of them more important than the other. The one that when Microsoft announced that it would be energy, carbon negative, to actually by 2050 have sucked up all the carbon they've ever produced as a company and be carbon negative from in their ongoing basis for 2030 onward. And then when Larry Fink of BlackRock, the world's largest investment company, announced that climate-related and environmental factors are going to be a much higher priority in their analysis and the pressure they put on the companies in their portfolio, in their $7 trillion portfolio. And then the third thing, which is also significant to me, McKinsey put out for the first time ever a major statement that climate is going to be a massive economic factor, and they went through all the areas that are going to be challenged, and they sort of played footsie with that issue up to then. So we're seeing a big shift in the business community, but it reflects a consumer sentiment that's shifting globally too. Talk about your perception of that.
So it's the reason we started the company was to address the climate crisis. I think when we started, there was a small group of people who really cared about this, and there was still debate around climate change. It was called back then. I think that we've seen things move a long way now, where activists like David Attenborough and Greta Thunberg and Extinction Rebellion, they're making people aware that there is a crisis. So now it's not so debated whether or not the temperatures are changing. But the problem that we see now is that there's just so much anxiety around what to do. People feel guilty about flying or the food they eat, and they don't know what choices they can make to reduce their own personal carbon emissions. I think it's great that companies like Microsoft are making pledges like that. I think that we should encourage organizations to move quickly on this, because we have a carbon budget, and if we're going to maintain, or if we're going to keep within that 2 degree temperature change, like we can't use up the budget, and we're using it fast. For consumers, I think that there's a few really simple steps that people can make in order to get that sort of anxiety relieved. One is switch to a renewable supplier, and there are plenty of good renewable suppliers in Germany, and all over the world that you can find and switch to. The second thing is there are behaviors that people can change that will actually help them save on cost and save on their carbon emissions. Travel gets a lot of attention. Actually, the food we eat is probably larger than that, and the impact it has. And then the third thing, and this is controversial, I get in a bit of trouble for saying this sometimes.
But let's hear it.
Yeah, but we really believe in offsets. Mm-hmm. We don't like the concept of offsets because we don't think that you should just emit carbon and then offset it somewhere else. But we do believe that there are projects that require funding that will help soak up carbon from the atmosphere. So that would be things like protecting rainforests that would otherwise be cut down to farm soy or farm cattle. And then the second way of supporting the climate and making donations is by investing in renewable generation in the developing world. So that means building solar plants or anaerobic digesters in developing countries that don't necessarily have the resources available. So as a consumer, if you do those three things of switching to renewables, adapting some of your behaviors, and then making a donation to the environment through carbon offsets, that's a great way of
But Bulb's business is going to stick to buying renewable energy. Or are you going to possibly get involved in some of these other areas?
So our members came to us last year. We started getting a lot of discussion in our community forum around offsets, because it's not clear how much an offset should cost.
Well, they're not audited very well, and once a tree is planted, you've got to guarantee that it stays there indefinitely, which is not typically done.
Exactly, but there are some organizations, like the United Nations, who do audit them in a very thorough way, and so we are, just in the last few weeks, have released a carbon calculator that then allows people to offset afterwards.
Oh, so you will help them with all these questions, even their diet and things like that? You think you'd get into that?
I don't think we're going to sort of start developing Impossible Burgers and things like that. But
no,
we are.
I'm not saying you would sell it, but you would help people think about it more clearly for themselves.
Exactly, but very importantly, in a positive way. Yeah.
Well, and this is such an interesting thing about your company that we should mention before we unfortunately have to end shortly. You are in a hated industry, but you are a loved company, which is a great position to be in. So you have this relationship with your customers because you bring a modern mindset, a digital customer relationship, a efficiency, a cost consciousness that is not really part of your industry typically.
Yeah, I think energy has historically been an industry that's quite complex and opaque and hard to understand. And what we try and do is give our customers the information that they need to make a good choice, whether that be about where they get their energy from, how they use it, or with respect to their carbon emissions.
Well, it says 0, and unlike some moderators, I'd like to end on time. So thank you, Hayden, and I hope anybody who wants more can come ask you and figure out how you can help launch in Germany. So thanks a lot.
Please do. Thank you. Thank you, David.